So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate all of you taking time to come and listen to SREB talk a little bit about elementary science. I see from on our participant list, we have folks from all over the country, so we're thrilled to have you. SREB, the Southern Regional Education Board, is an interstate compact that supports our states. But in the area of K-12, we actually have a footprint in about 30 states where we go and help different schools and districts in support of their school improvement and quality instruction. Samantha Durrance is with us today, and she's going to be sharing with you our policy brief on elementary science. For those of you that know me, and several of you from the participant list do, it's not a surprise to you that science is going to be part of something that I'm a part of. But luckily, this is something Samantha really took up and took charge of and really ran with. We've seen a lot of changes in science over the last several years, but we also know we've not seen enough. And when it comes to our work in science education, it's important, especially given the current state of affairs, that we take time to recognize the importance of science in elementary school, that we take time to realize that science is not something that we can afford to wait until middle school or high school for a child to learn, because all of this actually does have impact on what our students are able to do when they leave school. You know, the 21st century, and in particular, what we see coming in the workforce, is going to require thinking like what we try to instill in students through science education. It's not going to be long before our complete workforce changes. We have typically said at SREB that we set 2030 as this horizon before things will change in the workforce to automation and artificial intelligence. So with COVID-19, what we actually found is that 2030 is not really a horizon anymore. 2030 is actually the next exit. And so we have to actually recognize that as we've gone into this fourth industrial revolution, we've got to prepare our students to be really capable and able to be able to join the citizenry and workforce as they leave high school, as they leave college, as they leave technical colleges, or go straight into the workforce. But that has to start in elementary school. We also know, and Samantha's going to share more about this, that science is a place where students who may not initially have lots of interest in literacy and math, this is the place where kids start to see those things come together. And so we're really proud of Samantha and the work she's done. Proud to turn this over to her and let her share with you her work and her research around elementary science. So Samantha, take it away.
All right, thanks everybody for being here today. As Stephen was saying, we have released this elementary science brief, and I want to make sure everyone has a copy or knows where to find that. You can get it on our website, and I'm also going to put a link in the chat box right now. So you can download it from that page if you don't already have a copy of it. Our goal today is going to kind of be just an overview of what the brief says, and you can read in more detail by actually downloading it. It's not very long, only 8 pages. We're trying to keep it short and sweet. But one of the impetuses for writing this in the first place is, as Stephen said, science is very important in real life, in jobs, but it's also something that in elementary school, students are really interested in. They're learning in elementary school, and they're learning as young children how the world works. And I've had kind of a firsthand view of that recently because I have a 10-month-old son, and he is at the point where he's very curious. He's into everything. One of his favorite things now is to play the gravity game, which means that he takes anything he can find, remote controls, mice, bottles, drops them off the couch, drops them off the counter. He just wants to see what they do. And he's always amazed that they just fall to the ground, and some of them make loud noises, and some of them roll, and some of them bounce. But he's learning science. I mean, he's learning how gravity works, how the world is put together. And young children are curious like that. So elementary school is really a great time to harness that curiosity and help them as they're just beginning to learn how all of that works. In this brief, we have kind of 4 main points we're going to cover today. One is that scientific thinking and processes are valuable, not just in science, but really across all areas of learning. And that's something that all of you on this webinar are probably familiar with, but it's not something everybody necessarily appreciates. We also know that science receives inadequate attention in elementary school a lot of times. It receives inadequate time, and we'll talk about that. Scientific learning in elementary school should be 3D and integrated with other subjects. And we'll talk about the 3 dimensions that come from the National Research Council's K-12 framework. And elementary teachers, in order to teach science well, need adequate preparation in order to put those pieces together. So we'll talk about all 4 of these kind of main points from the brief. Again, many of you here today probably already know this, but science is really valuable. One way in which it's valuable is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. The value of that type of thinking and of those skills, not just to the workforce, but to our everyday lives, especially as technology continues to kind of increase and guide what we do. It's also really valuable these days because I don't know about you, but I have never needed to learn more and know more about what viruses are, how they work, how they spread, how I can keep myself safe. So that's certainly something that I think a lot of people are discovering right now. Science is really important. It's important to the decisions that we make. And we know that job-wise, science is going to continue to be one of the major areas in the fields that keep moving on toward 2030, the fields that are still growing. Some of those fields that rely directly on science and STEM are healthcare, which is a really increasing field in terms of employment. Skilled trades will always be necessary, and they use a lot of math, a lot of engineering, a lot of science skills, and a lot of white-collar professionals also use STEM skills. And the middle skilled workers that support those white-collar professionals do as well. So STEM is really important as we move toward 2030 and beyond 2030. As things continue to become more automated, we have more artificial intelligence, that kind of thinking and the ability to adapt and to know where to find information and to critically analyze information is going to be important for everybody. Despite that, though, one thing we know is that science doesn't receive the time that it probably deserves in elementary school. The 2018 National Survey of Science and Math Education found that 99% of K-3 teachers reported teaching math all or most days each week, which is not too surprising. But I'll pause for just a couple seconds unless you think about what you think the percentage of teachers who reported teaching science all or most days each week was. It was actually 17%. So fewer than 1 in 5 K-3 teachers reported teaching science all or most days each week. I found this kind of interesting. So I went to Google and I started looking for just examples of class schedules from elementary school. I don't even know where these are from. I just pulled some quick examples off the internet, so I didn't have to look hard to find these particular examples. But you can see here that in this first one, this kindergarten classroom devotes 15 minutes 4 times a week to science, so an hour total a week. This first grade classroom on the right devotes 30 minutes twice a week, and every other Friday, another 30 minutes to science. I have another class that has a 45-minute block for science and social studies put together, so 20 to 25 minutes for science probably. And even in upper elementary grades, it doesn't necessarily get that much better. In the 5th grade schedule on the right, that class has 35 minutes for science a day. And all this kind of meshes with what the 2018 survey found, which is that K-3 teachers reported spending about 18 minutes a day on science, and grades 4 through 6 teachers reported spending about 27 minutes a day. And that's in comparison to about an hour for math and an hour and a half for reading. And we know that math and reading are important. I don't think anybody would say they aren't. You're building some really important foundational skills in math and reading in elementary school, but you're also building some really important foundational skills in science and in social studies. And so one way to kind of take the time that students have in the classroom and use it maybe a little bit more effectively without taking away from math or from reading and language arts is to start kind of integrating those subjects, putting them together, better using that time that they have. Reading and science are actually really natural partners. Background knowledge and vocabulary are critical skills for reading. You can't understand what you read if you don't know what the words are that are on the page, if you've never encountered those topics. And science is actually really important for building background knowledge and vocabulary. And as we have moved into a way of teaching language arts that uses more nonfiction texts, so students run into a lot more science knowledge and a lot more science content in what they are reading. And as Stephen said earlier, a lot of students are very interested in that type of content. They want to be able to read about those nonfiction subjects. They want to be able to read about engineering. They want to be able to read about scientific facts and knowledge. So putting reading and science together really makes a lot of sense. And just to be clear, we're not just saying that students should read about science and that counts as science instruction. But really what we're saying is what the National Research Council pointed out, which is that reading, interpreting, and producing text or writing are fundamental practices of science. So students can learn to read and learn to write through science, and they can learn science through reading and writing. And really when they're doing those things together, they're being scientists. They're doing the things that scientists do, and that's really valuable. Math is also another subject that integrates really neatly with science. And there are a lot of skills that are common in math and in science. That's why engineering is often kind of put together with science too. Analyzing and interpreting data, finding patterns, developing models, and making predictions based on that models are all skills that are found both in science and math. Anything to do with charts or graphs, interpreting charts and graphs, creating charts and graphs, those are common to science and math. So there are a lot of overlap between science and math. So teaching science through math or having students do math as they are practicing science is also another great way to integrate those two subjects, make better use of the instructional time, and really teach both, or teach those skills in both ways. Teach them in math, teach them in science. This is an image actually from the brief, so you can look at it in more detail there when you do read the brief, but it's just a way to visualize kind of how much overlap there is between these three subjects. And this is not to say that social studies is completely left out or has no place here. It definitely does, and we plan to produce a future piece about that. But science and math and language arts are pretty easy to directly tie together, and it's a little bit easier for most people to see how they do tie together. So you can see kind of at the middle of these three circles, even though there are a lot of skills that overlap on all sides, is arguing from evidence, which is really critical in everyday life. Taking the information you see and understanding it, breaking it down, analyzing it, and then creating an argument based on that. That's something that we probably all do every day, and that students really need to be able to do as they kind of move up through the grades and get better at that and prepare to move out into the workforce and move out as adults. When we talk about what science actually should look like when it comes to that instruction, we based a lot of this brief really on the National Research Council's K-12 framework, which came out in 2012, so it's not exactly brand new, but it is something that a lot of people are still learning about. And this idea of three-dimensional science still doesn't always happen in the classroom. And again, most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, so we're just going to kind of breeze through what this is for those who aren't. But definitely I would refer you to the framework itself for more information about that. The three kind of dimensions of science instruction that the framework talks about are scientific and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts in science and engineering, and disciplinary core ideas in the different sciences. Those scientific and engineering practices really kind of revolve around obtaining information, evaluating it, and communicating it to other people. That's where kind of the math and reading language arts come in. You're analyzing what you have, you might be creating models with it, and you're communicating it orally or in written manner to other people. These are practices that are really critical in science and engineering, and practices that are really critical in school and in learning in general, and that we use in life too. The cross-cutting concepts that kind of tie science and engineering together, patterns, causality, and systems, are what students should be learning about through these practices. They're learning how these things kind of work together. And together with that, they're learning the core ideas that move across the sciences. Life sciences, engineering, technology, earth and space, and physical sciences all have core knowledge that's important for students to know as they are developing these scientific practices and learning how everything fits together in these patterns. So if you put all three of these dimensions together, you really get three strands of science that should be interwoven if we're talking about what good science instruction looks like. So students are learning how to use these scientific practices, they are learning knowledge in the core ideas, and they are developing an understanding of the cross-cutting concepts in science and engineering. And putting that all together really requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of skill on a teacher's part. We know that elementary teachers often feel pretty well prepared to teach reading and math. A lot of teacher preparation focuses on those two things. So about 3/4 of elementary teachers say that they feel very well prepared to teach reading and math, but only about 1/3 of elementary teachers say that they feel very well prepared to teach science. And I kind of think that's sad personally. I think we should be able to equip our teachers to walk into the classroom and feel very well prepared to teach whatever subject they're teaching. And for elementary teachers, that's a lot because they are teaching all of the subjects together. But you see there clearly a disconnect between reading, language arts, and math and science. And I suspect social studies, although I don't think it was in the survey, or I didn't look at that data if it was in the survey, but social studies is probably somewhere in there with science as well. In order to do this, in order to feel well prepared walking into the classroom, elementary teachers need several things. They need an understanding of 3D science themselves. They need to understand what those three dimensions are, how they work together, how to provide instruction that really tackles all of those. And they need to understand what it looks like for students to display performance of those practices, to display that they have that core knowledge. That means focusing on helping students make sense of what they're seeing and doing, and learn how to think at a higher level, think critically, think systematically. That means helping students conduct investigations, engage in discussions, have open-ended questions that they're answering, and solve problems. And all of that requires creating in students what some researchers have called a need to learn. So harnessing their curiosity and really getting them engaged in why they should want to learn about this particular topic, and helping them make their thinking visible as they're doing that. And I know I personally, I don't do very well with abstracts. It's helpful to see what this looks like. So we found a short little video that kind of shows a classroom where students are really engaged in this inquiry-based learning, in this investigation. I think Stephen wanted to provide just a little bit of intro to that, and then we'll show you that short video.
So this is a video that will really dig into some things that are going on in a 5th grade classroom. Now, a couple of things to look for. You're going to see where you're going to see structure and properties of matter. You're going to see energy. You're going to see where energy fields are interplaying. Some of these, if you look at the actual next generation science standards, you'll actually see your 3rd grade standards. But as you know, in the framework itself, it's divided up in grades 3 through 5. But you're going to see a group of kids who are experimenting with electrical circuits, and you're going to see some that are experimenting with a catapult. Now, you know, those are two things that I know historically people show it and they go, oh, look how cute that is, that they're actually sitting there playing with this stuff. It's a lot more than just playing with this stuff. For instance, you're going to see that when they're doing the electrical circuits, they actually start having the kids ask questions about what other things conduct electricity. They get into structure and properties of matter when they start recognizing that actually metals conduct electricity, but actually some metals do and some not so well. With catapults, you're actually looking at how motion is affected. Again, that's a 3rd grade NGSF performance expectation, but they don't get into the weeds on that with this video, but it is a nice video that shows how they are having the kids engage and design their own investigations, which of course we know is a science and engineering practice, how they're looking for patterns, how they're looking for cause and effect. When they're shooting their catapult, how can they make it land in certain places? How can you predict the motion of those things? And at the end of the day, and this is the part we don't see in the video as much, is, and I think she uses the term lab before blab. And the idea here is that after this is over, it's not just a cute activity. It wasn't just something that what we used to do with inquiry where all right, kids, everything's on the table. Everybody learn everything that every scientist ever learned in the next 45 minutes or less. Try not to remind anybody. It's not that kind of thing, but it's also one of those things where they transition into the discussions around making the arguments, using their math, using their literacy to actually look at this phenomenon. I'm looking at the chat box, and Leanne just said, the little one in the orange is her daughter, who is now an upcoming junior in high school. So, well, surprise to you, Leanne, and congratulations, and nice little surprise there. So it's a lot, and I ask that you remember that you can't see full three-dimensional in 3 minutes, but we're going to do the best that we can. So, Samantha, why don't you let them see it?
Split it, and somebody hold it like this, and then we can go like, there we go. Oh, we did it again. We did it again.
We don't use a textbook, and basically what we do in my room is it's just about having fun and learning by doing. And I think that's the biggest part about science is in order to learn science, you have to do it.
You got it.
We start off using a battery and a light bulb and a piece of foil. And I just basically put it on their table and say, make it light. And so it's just basically just a very simple inquiry activity where they're just given materials and they have to figure it out.
Why do you have it on both ends?
If they don't both connect, then how is it going to charge well?
When they figured out that the foil is basically a type of metal, and so is the wire. So then a lot of them started to figure out, well, I wonder if other metals will work. And so they kind of work off each other and talk to each other, and they'll wrap up the battery, they'll wrap up the light bulb, they'll, do crazy things to try to make it work, but eventually they'll figure it out. And when they do figure it out, they'll never forget it.
Yes, we got it. We got it.
Now, the way a catapult works, I'm sure you've all seen how catapults work. It pulls back, and then it releases, and the cat will fly. Fifth graders are doing a lesson on catapults, and the catapult is basically showing them that different ways that objects move, and by changing the force behind the catapult, the cat that they will be launching will move to a different spot. So they'll be measuring using meter sticks, they'll be measuring in centimeters and collecting data, and then they'll be calculating an average. They are then going to design a system, so it's going to have to go exactly 1 meter. So they'll have to adjust it, and it's a lot of manipulating their catapult to make that happen. And at the end, they will take we'll try them all out and see who came the closest to the meter mark. It's pretty close, about 104. And it's possible that many of the groups could get the meter, but they did a different combination of using the different parts of the catapult to make it happen. They think it's neat just to see the little cats flying through the air, of course, because that's always fun to launch things across the room. But when they actually try to get to their meter mark as their goal, when they actually make it happen, they'll jump up and down and scream too. We do the lab before the blab. And a lot of times teachers will stand there and say, okay, this is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it, and this is what's going to happen. And that's it. And so it's like, what's the point of doing it then? Because you've already told us everything. And it was really just allowing the kids to, figure it out, make it happen, and then it's meaningful. And then they can talk about why it did what it did.
And it would just go through and to the foil up.
So what we've created is a circuit, and when that circuit is closed or complete, then we have the electricity flowing through it. If I open a piece of it up, it's not going to work. So when
they do things on their own and they figure them out as a group or individually, then it sticks with them. They're not going to forget that. So when they come back the next time, they're going to say, oh, hey, remember when we did this? It's not going to be, do you remember when we read something in a book? It's real to them, and they'll remember that.
It's learning! Yeah, good teamwork!
So, since we have the star of the video actually with us today, hey, Leanne, can you unmute yourself for a second? First of all, great job. Thank you for doing this video. What can you just share for a minute? What kinds of things did you do as follow-up to all this that really integrated the literacy and the math part?
Well,
Spot.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My hair's a little shorter now.
Yeah.
I had a science lab. And so all the students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade came to me for science. And it was only twice a week, so I didn't see them that often. But what we would do in the science lab was do all of the hands-on pieces, and we would do all the investigating, collecting all the data, and then they would take back their data sheets to the classroom so that the teacher could follow up and do any of the readings and any conclusion writing and things like that in the regular classroom.
Whoa, wait. Are you saying that y'all plan together and work together to create a learning environment for students that's in a whole child mindset?
Some do, yes, but not all. Not all. And so the interesting thing is, like, I always had my teachers that hated science. They hated everything about it. Oh, I can't do science. Science is terrible, blah, blah, blah. They were my best ones because they would come in and help me do some of the science pieces, but then they go back to their classroom and they say, okay, remember what you learned in science. Now let's apply what you've learned there to what we've done remember, we've been learning about argumentative writing. So let's see if we can figure out how we can incorporate what you've done in science into our writing piece today. Or they'll write a poem or something along those lines. And some of the teachers did a great job with it, but some did not. I think you'll have that everywhere. But in an ideal world, that's exactly how it would play out.
That's awesome, Leanne. Thank you for sharing that. This completely impromptu, and
I saw the picture. I was like, oh my gosh, that's my old lab.
No, we did not plan on this.
Exactly. I appreciate you letting us put you on the spot this way. Yeah, and I think it's fantastic. The example is on YouTube, and you'll be able to view that if any of the rest of you would like to use it. But you know, I think it was a really great example, and I really appreciate you taking time. And I'll tell you, just as a former chief state school officer, state superintendent, or commissioner, depending on what state you're in, I will tell you, I saw some of the best 3D teaching in elementary schools.
Oh, thank you.
It was actually, in fact, don't even get me started on high school.
I know.
In elementary, they were there. But the issue, though, was, like you said, you've got to have the teachers who feel comfortable. Samantha said this earlier. We've got to figure out how to help all of our teachers feel comfortable being a part of that, seeing how it's in their math and literacy lessons. But you know, having you in that school, I know, was a real benefit. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Samantha, back to you.
Sure. I think something Leanne just said actually about some teachers not feeling very comfortable with the science content. We had a question in the chat that relates a lot to that. That said, from Kevin Anderson, some students have basically decided that they're a science person or they're not a science person by the end of elementary school. And that really kind of determines how they engage with it in middle school and beyond. And he asked if we'd seen any research on this identity development. And that isn't something that I came across in my research for the brief, and it's not something we touch on in the brief, unfortunately. But it is something that we wrote about in a math report that came out last year. And I think what struck me is that it's probably coming from the same driving force where students decide that they're either a math person or not a math person. I suspect that you have sort of the same thing going on with science, because a lot of these same thinking skills and in some ways performance skills are being used in math and in science. That would be my guess. I don't know if Stephen knows anything about that or has anything to add to that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of research about that. I commented about that too. Kevin, I think it's a great point. I wish more people would do it, because here's the thing. We have entered this fourth industrial revolution. You know, we've been talking about STEM education for a long time, and I've sort of gotten to a point I don't even talk about STEM anymore because everything's going to be STEM. I mean, we have self-driving cars in some cities already. They're you know, self-driving Lyfts or Ubers. We have people, you go into restaurants and you already don't talk to a person. You just simply put your order in. And the world is going to change so much. And the fourth industrial revolution is really about being able to work with machines or with automation as opposed to the automation working for us. And it's a different world. And so and I know some of you are going, what's he going off on this tangent for? I have a reason. The reason is that we can't afford to have kids coming out of elementary school with that mentality that I'm a science person or not, because I strongly believe you will not be able to get by in this world by the time our elementary kids right now graduate high school without being able to think the way we're talking about kids thinking through science education. I mean, the same, you know, math and English, of course, reading are big for this, but the way that science brings those things together, if we want to talk about disparities and we want to talk about setting our kids up to continue to be second-class citizens, whether it be by poverty or by race, then we deprive them of science education in elementary school. We've got to get these kids in elementary school into science with the recognition that this is what will propel them into an equitable opportunity for them to be a part of society and to be a part of the economy. So this is a big deal, and so I appreciate that comment, Kevin. It was a very astute comment, and hopefully maybe we can work with some folks that would get that we can get that research really rolling, because I think that would be a big thing.
And to add to that, and going back to our bigger point about integrating the subjects, it's harder to be a math person or not a math person, or a science person or not a science person, if math and science and reading and science, social studies and everything else you learn are kind of integrated together in such a way where they're not considered separated in your mind so much. So I think kind of helping students see how all of that works together can help with their attitudes toward it as well. But certainly I'll be on the lookout if I see anything that has to do with that. That kind of takes us into our next point, though, about what elementary teachers need in order to teach science well. In addition to what we've already talked about, in their teacher preparation programs, they need science content courses that have a teaching specific focus, that are not just biology that everyone in college takes, chemistry that everyone in college takes, but that teaches them how to take those subjects and really apply them in the classroom, and specifically apply them in that lab before blab, or also known as an activity before content, or ABC model. There's a diagram here that shows kind of what that looks like, which is where students do it, talk it, read it, and then write it. So they do an activity, they talk about the activity, what they noticed, what they saw, what they observed. They might read about it in a book. Sorry, I just had to admit someone else. Read about it in a book, or read more in depth about what is going on with that phenomenon. And then they write about it, or they could tell about it. And that's another great opportunity for them to be making models, making charts, integrating some of the math there too, communicating what it is that they learned and what they're seeing. And along with that, teachers need to know how to do interdisciplinary teaching. They need instruction in that. It's not something that just comes naturally to everyone when they walk into the classroom. And it's not how elementary school has traditionally been set up per se. When I've seen an attempt at interdisciplinary teaching, it usually tends to be more surface level. It's, you know, you do an activity in math and then you answer a few questions about it using writing. And that's not really integrating the subjects. It's really just doing some math and then writing down your answers that you would otherwise be talking about, thinking about, and communicating. So these are just some more things that we really need to equip elementary teachers for. So coming out of this brief, we have 3 recommendations that we developed based on everything that we've talked about The first is to ensure that science receives enough time in the classroom. There's no research that says, you know, it needs 78 minutes in order to be effective or anything like that. But the National Science Teachers Association recommends about 60 minutes a day for investigations and inquiry in science instruction. And again, school time has to come from somewhere. So if students are already receiving instruction in much of the day and that time is being used effectively, one way to get some more time in for science is by integrating those subjects. We also recommend encouraging interdisciplinary instruction. Part of that comes through making sure that teachers are able to provide that, but another part of that is providing teachers with the materials and the support and the resources to do that. Quality materials, quality resources, not just asking them to do more writing in the classroom. We had a comment from Kathy Renfro that says, you need to read and write about something, why not science? That is true. And our third recommendation is to equip elementary teachers to use that inquiry-based three-dimensional learning, which goes back to all of the things we just talked about, all of the different aspects that teachers need to be prepared for when they come out of teacher preparation, and that they can get through professional learning if they didn't get it in teacher preparation. SRAB has some support for this actually. We've had some language arts practices and some math practices that have kind of guided our professional learning and professional development support for teachers for a while. But we now have developed science powerful practices, and Stephen's going to talk a little bit more about those.
So we've had, as Matt said, for a while now, SREB has had its own set of powerful math and powerful literacy practices. We have actually worked, in fact, some of you who were paying attention, you saw some names earlier that you may have noticed. Brett Molding and I actually worked on this together. And these are going to be the SREB's powerful science instructional practices. Now, I want to be clear, these are instructional practices. They are different than the science and engineering practices from the framework. But these are things that actually should be going on in classrooms. If you're interested in this, we can send you more detail. But what we've done is we've actually identified these 8 things, and then we've also created a chart that shows here's student behavior, here's teacher behavior for each of these types of practices. And this is kind of a flow. This is a way that you could actually consider constructing a classroom. So first of all, making sense of natural and human design phenomena. Here, of course, we're using phenomena, and we're trying to be clear here that we're talking about both natural phenomena, but also engineering as phenomena. Secondly, students and teachers should provide an environment where they can develop questions, plan and carry out investigations, design solutions, and or obtain information. To be clear, this is not the teacher developing questions, this is actually the students doing that. The students should gather data and information to use in developing evidence. As a reminder, you can have 1,000 data points, and that's all they are. It doesn't become evidence until you start to really put the reasoning around and identifying the patterns, identifying the causal effects. So the next one, of course, is reasoning how the evidence supports explanation for the causes of the phenomena. The next thing is engaging in academic discourse. There's having students actually articulate their thinking, make their thinking visible, and presenting that evidence of learning. So how would the teacher set up an environment where they can actually really do this, where they're presenting their thinking and allowing students to actually engage in back and forth with them. Then communicating reasoning through individual three-dimensional performance. So here we're talking about the actual performance, what kids are going to be doing. This is where the culminating activity. This is the three-dimensional aspect of this, where they're doing a task, or they're bringing to bear that they have understood and have used all the different aspects of three-dimensional thinking. And then finally, being able to apply the science learning beyond the classroom. If all we can do is actually within the classroom, then I'm not sure that we're doing a service to our students. We want them, if we've really done this right, then if they really engage in three-dimensional thinking and they really know how to use those cross-cutting concepts, then they can apply the science they're learning in classroom beyond what's happening in that classroom. So it's actually a pretty incredible thing. Got a question here, where can we find the documents about teachers' actions, students' actions with the powerful science instruction practices? Those are going to be posted on our website very soon. This is actually, you guys are getting a little early glimpse at what this is about to be, but we will be posting that shortly, and you'll be able to see that. We also are creating a teacher induction program for math and science that goes along with our Teaching to Lead program that is based on these science instructional practices. So we're really excited about moving more into the areas of science. So for more information, stay tuned. We'll be able to share this more with you. We're working to actually improve and kind of make some of these things ready for prime time, but we will be able to put this out there, and we'll be able to share the links with you once all that actually gets posted. So with that, Samantha, do we want to take questions? Do we? I know we've got a few things here in the chat box. I don't know if you've been looking or not.
Sure. I had not seen any other questions, but I did want to let everybody know real quick that I'm going to put the link to the policy brief in the chat box again. For anybody who came in a little bit late and didn't see it originally, you can access our policy brief on elementary science at that link. But yes, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Anthony Quine has shared that they're working on a statewide resource and institute focused on scientific literacy there in California. And I know Shari from Vermont shared earlier that they were using CARES money to develop some of these integrated units. If those things are going to be public, we would love to know, and we would love to be able to share those. So thank you for letting everybody know about that. I'm sorry, I said Vermont. I meant Maine. My bad, Shari. My bad. I will tell all of you, if you've never had it, peanut butter taffy is the best thing you'll ever have. Shari brings it to me every time we have a meeting.
And we had a couple questions about this PowerPoint and the recording of this webinar. They will be posted on srib.org. I think it takes a little bit of time for Zoom to process the video, but as soon as that's available, we will share that on social media. So be watching our Twitter page and Facebook pages.
Absolutely. So feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat box. We're happy to have a little quiet time while you do that. If not, then we would close it down.
Hi, everybody. First, I want to say thank you to Stephen and Samantha. This is Jen Brown-Whale from Howard County, Maryland. And my question is just related to, I really like this idea of integration because certainly we see a lot of putting content on the back burner. I love that, Samantha, you pulled some schedules from the internet. That was a big part of our efforts this year to actually start to pull school schedules from our 42 elementary schools and actually like calculate how much content instruction is on the schedule, first of all, right? And then how much is actually maybe getting done when we go in. Our county is, so previously our elementary curriculum offices were very fortunate enough to be able to work with teachers in order to create our own curriculum. So, and the science and social studies and health offices still do that. Our language arts office recently purchased a writing and a reading system, so pre-packaged, that they're rolling out to teachers. So previous to this year, we worked with our language arts office as much as we could to try to align their units with our units or with the standards, right? We were really flexible. We said, okay, let's make our trajectory, our scope and sequence of standards match what they're doing in language arts so that it can overlap, and actually they can collaborate on it. But now with this system, there's quote unquote science built in, but there's a specific scope and sequence that the language arts has to follow. So I guess what I'm getting at is, what are your suggestions for integrating language arts and math with science instruction when there are like serious constraints that don't align with the NGSS?
So here's the thing. I mean, this is always one of the biggest challenges that we have, I think, in school in general, but in particular in elementary school. I mean, integrated is the way to go, but also sometimes integrated is code for wink, wink, nod, nod, we're doing it, but really we're going to be reading about butterflies as opposed to studying them. And so I guess my advice to you would be, my first thought is, you should do your best to inform those who are making decisions about how well there is alignment. And remind them that, while it's not going to be assessed in the same way math and reading is, it does ultimately get assessed. But the other part is, if you just simply can't win that battle and you actually have to go with a program, then my suggestion would be, find the phenomena that you could utilize for to me, that and somebody said this actually earlier, I think it was Anthony, that's sort of the beauty of the framework in NGSS. It really is very malleable. So maybe the work becomes, if the literacy is kind of the part that you have to follow more lockstep, design the phenomena that actually would support what that literacy order would be, and make that explicit connection, so that the kids are still really getting the experience in the science. I mean, the reality is, with the powerful instructional practices, we were really deliberate. In fact, you'll see in the document that we did about teacher and student behaviors, you'll see where we make it, here's where you should be connecting literacy. And so we actually kind of give some help on that once that's public, which should be probably next week, or at the latest next week. So it's a challenge, and it's always hard because, unfortunately, a lot of times people who are making decisions about that, they're either generalists or they don't really understand the content itself. And I'm just going to be honest, sometimes they just think, well, it's just science, they can figure it out. And the reality is we can, but it's going to take a little bit of extra time and effort. I don't know, does that even come close to starting to help you?
Sure, yeah. It certainly, and I definitely understand the challenge that we're in, right? But we also have to be strategic about how we go about increasing the awareness and the use of science instruction. And if literacy, right? Like if reading and writing instruction is something obviously that is going to be highly emphasized for important reasons, we should try to wiggle our way into there, right? So.
That's right. That's right. I mean, this is just being full disclosure. I am a big proponent of assessment and a big proponent of accountability. But I'm also a big proponent of understanding that both of those have limitations, and they're both designed to do specific things. And the unfortunate part is that over time, we've let that be the decision maker as opposed to teaching kids. So, we often teach for accountability. We try, and so part of what you're going to have to, I think, work with your administrators on is helping them see how science does help with math and reading, but that means you have to do it appropriately. And it means you have to do it in a way that is, giving the right justification and the right respect to the science itself. But it's awfully hard to get that through some people's heads. I mean, you know, it's all about accountability. Well, no, it's actually all about making sure kids can get jobs someday. It's about making sure kids can be part of society someday. And that sounds a little ethereal, and unfortunately not everybody buys into that, but that is actually the biggest issue we've got to figure out, is how do you really build that? And actually, ding, ding, I love that, building relationships and collaboration between curriculum officers and school leadership. That is actually what we have to do. But that means that teachers have to really step up to the plate and be willing to do that. I mean, this is the thing about elementary. I have a really good friend named Marlene, and she said this to me one time, and I got really angry at her, didn't speak to her for a couple hours. We worked together. And she said, well, you know, the biggest difference between me and you, now she was a K-5 teacher, I was a high school teacher. We were working at the Georgia Department of Education. She said, you know, the biggest difference is you teach content, I teach kids. And I got so mad at her because I'm like, and then the more I thought of it, I'm like, you know what, she's right. When somebody asks me, what do I teach? I say chemistry. When people say, what do you teach? She says third grade students. And so Kathy, I see what you put, I teach kids first. Way to go. And that's, you know, I think we've got to figure out how to help administrators see that if we adopt that mentality, not only do we do service to the students, we also do service to accountability and to assessment, because it builds toward a better product overall.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sorry, I don't mean to get on the soapbox, but that's a big thing for me. I believe in accountability, but I also believe that the reason we have accountability is to ensure equity, and we don't do enough to stop and realize that part of that equity is not that they can make a passing score on the test, it's that they are able to communicate their own learning, and it's bigger than that.
Yep, and I totally appreciate a good soapbox speech because out of passion comes some really like valuable words, right, and phrases and thinking that then arm me for advocating on my end too. So thank you. You're
welcome. Don't forget, Maryland is part of SREB. You guys may not sell sweet tea in the restaurants up there, but you're definitely part of the South as far as we're concerned. So if there's anything we can do to help, let us know.
Great. Yeah, I saw us on the map, so I know we're included.
I just wanted to point out, if anybody missed it, Cindy French had a good idea for anybody using Lucy Calkins reading units and how to kind of integrate those units with science as well.
Yeah, and that's really valuable because people are really struggling with that particular program and doing that, just that.
Very good. Other thoughts or questions? If not, we'll be closing it out.
I have one other question, and I know this is kind of thinking about our future. That's very much, we have a total unknown going on coming up in the fall, but what are some of the suggestions that we have, or that you all have, for being able to keep our kids on track if we're doing distance learning in the fall, or if we're doing a partial online piece and then a partial in school? Like, how can we keep our kids engaged in science at home when most kids probably don't have materials to actually do investigations at their house? So do you have any ideas or any thoughts on that?
I do, actually. I think that this is where we have forgotten about the beauty of the outdoors and the beauty of letting kids explore. The biggest challenge I think you have is actually, how do you help parents help the kids? There's actually a website, and I apologize, I don't have it at my fingertips, or I would put it in the chat box. But if you want to send me an email, I'll be glad to share it with you. Brett Molding, who is a good friend of mine and who helped us write the framework and the NGSS, and also helped us with the powerful science practices, released on his website a set of tasks that were developed in Hawaii and in Utah that that can be used for actual science at home. Well, there's science performances, but he's identified the ones that can be done at home. And they actually have really nice directions and how you would set this up and all that. So, you know, you're right. I don't know what we're going to look like in the fall. What I'm hearing most is that we're probably going to be looking at some type of hybrid where you're going to be in school some days, not in other days. It's going to be a real challenge. And again, I think this is where administration is going to be really important. They're going to have to help out and say all this stuff is important. But I would encourage you to go there and try to. I mean, there are things that we do that, and we forget that there are little things that we can do for kids that they don't have to have a whole lot of equipment or apparatus. I mean, obviously it's ideal, but there are things that we can do with, you know, having kids go outside and put a stick in the ground and watch the shadow and the shadow length over the course of a week and graph that, write about what patterns you're seeing, and then have them go back and do that in a month and see what changed. And you know, that helps the elementary kids become more understandable of, you know, the Earth, Sun, Moon system. And so it really does. I think there's ways to get that done, but it's like everything else. It's going to take some real time and thought to pull all that together.
Oops.
Thank you for those who shared the links in the chat box. There are a few different resources there you can go take a look at.
Yeah, there's several really good ones. Actually, Megan, thank you, Megan. I didn't even realize you were here. Megan works with us at SREB. The link that she put on there is actually Brett's book around teaching science. But he has a website that actually has the actual tasks on there, but I'm drawing a blank on what they are right now. So sorry.
The links I put in, one is Learning in Places. It's really for K-3, but it was built with Megan Bang and her work. So that's there. The second link is the link to the phenomena work that I did with CS Cubed. And there's lots of other pieces there. There's a piece on science notebooks, and there's a piece on discourse. So those were the 3 tools that were available right around there. I only put the phenomena one in, but that's so.
Very good, very good. And I'm going to put my email in here. I actually accidentally sent that to Kathy Colburn alone, but I was going to put it in there for everybody. If you have any, if you want some of those resources that I know of, I'll be glad to send those along. I just can't remember it off the top of my head. All right. Well, with that, Samantha, do you have any parting words?
No, thank you all for being here today. Please look out for the recording to be available. I know we had a lot of interest in sharing that with other people who couldn't be on the webinar. We'll get this recording and our presentation posted on our website soon. So be on the lookout.
Very good. Thank you so much. We appreciate everybody being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne.
Thank you.